Welcome back to Movies TV Mad. You can follow me on Twitter at Movies TV Mad. And a very warm welcome to Friday's edition of the DC Universe Daily. So James Gunn has told Twitter that he has spoken to Zack Snyder about his DC slate. Yes, James Gunn is crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's. And also he said that he and Peter have spoken to Netflix about lots of DC things, but not about selling Snyderverse to Netflix. So I want to discuss all of this stuff. In fact, James disrespectfully called the Netflix campaign from Snyderverse fans and stans as wacky. Now, I find that utterly disrespectful, and we will get into it on today's show. And I'm going to be I'm going to be very balanced about this situation. I've already said I support this campaign, and I think there's very little chance of it happening. But because they're telling Snyderverse stans to stop attacking James Gunn and being positive, I support the campaign. I would like this to happen, even though I think there's very little chance of this happening. We'll get into it. First, let's discuss the fact that he said that he spoke to Zack Snyder, and Zack Snyder said he loved his DC Universe plan, and he really supports it, and Zack showed no intention of wanting to return to DC, and he's fully committed to what he's doing over at Netflix. We all know that Zack would give anything to return to DC and finish his Injustice arc, right? Which started with Man of Steel, Batman vs. Superman, Dawn of Justice, the Snyder Cut, then he was going to do Justice League 2, then he was going to do Justice League 3. 5 movies. He has never stopped wanting to do this. No, James, he wouldn't discuss this with you because he's too much of a gentleman and he knows it's not what you want, right? So why would he discuss this with you? Maybe you told him, look, mate, you've got no chance of coming back. I don't know what the discussions that you had between each other, and clearly they were very amicable, and you know, you two have worked together before in the zombie movie, so obviously there's history between Zack and James Gunn. Now, I don't think they're friends. Just because you've worked with someone before doesn't mean you're friends with them. I worked with loads of people before. We either end up enemies or, you know, we got on all right, but we're not friends, right? And that's okay. Look, I think James is not making any of this up. But just because he didn't say to James Gunn, I'd love to come back, James, I'd love to finish off my arc. Why would he? Why would he get into a conversation that's going to end in tears? He knows the situation, right? So, of course he's not going to mention it. Of course he's going to mention Army of the Dead. Probably James asked him about Army of the Dead, like franchise, and what he's doing with Rebel Moon. And they probably discussed that. Look, James is calling up everyone. He's trying to make sure that everyone's on point with him so he doesn't have any problems. So he's spoken to Zack Snyder. And Zack, being the gentleman that he is, has congratulated him and said, yeah, I like the plan. Well, guess what? I like the plan as well. I can like the plan and still say that I love Man of Steel, BVS, and Zack Snyder's Justice League Snyder Cut. I can like the plan and like that. But make no mistake, the inference that James Gunn's trying to make here that, Zack has no interest in returning to DC to finish off, his Justice League arc is, Zack didn't say to him, look, man, I ain't interested. I wish those fuckers would stop all that on the internet. He didn't say that, and James didn't say that, but he tried to infer that Zack is no longer interested. He made an assumption. Now, a few weeks ago, someone said something on Vero about money talking. In terms of selling Snyderverse to Netflix, Zack Snyder liked that comment or post or whatever it is. Zack Snyder has not given up in wanting to return to DC and finish off his Justice League arc. Now, this is a big threat to James Gunn and what he's planning. And also, there's no foregone conclusion that what James and Peter are doing here is actually going to be successful. Now, he's kind of making quite a few enemies as well. I mean, the other day he said that basically the MCU, it was not as well planned out as his DC universe is. Basically, he's inferring, you know, he's a big inference, by the way, that Kevin Feige was making it up as he went along. Now that doesn't surprise me, because guess what? Kevin Feige was making it up as he was going along. He wasn't actually planning anything at first. He just made Iron Man, right? It worked. They had a post-credit scene. Then they had other movies with other post-credit scenes. The only reason they kept on doing post-credit scenes wasn't part of some plan. It's because people liked the post-credit scenes. Now, most fans hated Iron Man 2, The Incredible Hulk, although it doesn't have a cult following, The Incredible Hulk, and I'm one of that cult following. I think it's a great movie. So, you know, they hated the first Captain America. They hated the first Thor. I love both those movies, by the way, as well. So they hated all the originals. Like, die-hard Marvel fans hated those original solo movies. In fact, people wanted him fired. In fact, someone at Disney also wanted Feige fired, and Iger wouldn't allow it. I was reading that over on Twitter yesterday, by the way, if you want to fact check it. So Feige was making it up as he went along. Now, he did, you know, ultimately, was Thanos that built up before the first Avengers? No. So we have the first Avengers movie. Now, this is like a team effort between Joss Whedon, Kevin Feige, and another writer. It ended up being a really, really good film, because guess what? It is a really, really good superhero team-up movie. That's undeniable, right? And obviously, a semblance of a plan was beginning then, but it was never that planned out, and that's what James Gunn has tried to infer, but it's something you probably shouldn't say out loud. But it's clear there are some, let's say, issues between Disney and James Gunn, and maybe there's something, you know, don't forget, when Feige was asked about Gunn working at DC while still working on Guardians, he said, I think James is going to be too busy to work on DC. So clearly, even Feige, who Gunn calls a good friend and trusts, is not very happy about this situation. Of course he's not going to be very happy. This is not a good situation for Marvel, because Gunn is a talented man. Safran is also a talented man. One's a producer, one's a storyteller. You know, put them together, this could work out very well. As I say, I'm excited about the plan. But let's be clear about this, James. Zack Snyder wants to finish off his DC story. His Justice League arc that started with Man of Steel. And he hasn't said anything to you to prove any different. Number one. Now, number two. He continues in talking about the Netflix campaign from Snyderverse fans and stans to sell Snyderverse to Netflix, calling it a wacky idea. He said that we have had discussions with Netflix about other things, obviously selling other DC streaming things off. I think a lot of the DC streaming things they're doing that they're saying is HBO Max will be HBO Max and probably also Netflix. So clearly they've had some discussions. I'm happy about that because I want access to the HBO Max DC Universe stuff that's on that new slate, because I'm excited about the slate and a DC fan. But he said we have had, Netflix have showed no interest in buying the Snyderverse, right? And we haven't had those discussions, he said. Well, let's go back to Batgirl, James and Peter Safran. Let's go back to Batgirl. Batgirl was shelved. Basically, at the time it was announced, the directors and the cast and crew had no idea this was happening. In fact, the day before, the directors, or one of them, was bragging and being excited and being really proud about this movie in an article. They knew nothing. In fact, a member of the Batgirl crew told me the first time she knew anything about it is when she saw my YouTube video and one of my retweets. And that is a fucking true story, everyone. So is it really beyond the realms of possibility, James Gunn and Peter Safran, that if this 214 campaign on this Valentine's Day to sell Snyderverse to Netflix goes really well, really well, could it be that negotiations to sell Snyderverse to Netflix could leave James Gunn and Peter Safran, the co-CEOs of DC Studios, out of the negotiating loop. So these two guys may not even know what's going on. What is their position at DC Studios? Well, they'll say anything that comes into the brand of DC. Not true, because Zaslav has his hands on the chicken switch. So basically, if Zaslav likes this campaign, if Zaslav sees a good trend on Valentine's Day to sell Snyderverse to Netflix, you really think that James Gunn is going to have anything to do with this? So yes, James Gunn has spoken to Zack Snyder. Zack Snyder told him he's excited about the slate and the plan. But Zack Snyder was never going to start getting on his bended knees, excuse my throat, on his bended knees and say, please, James, let me finish my Snyderverse. Nah. Because any conversations that have ever happened in that realm have always been between Zaslav, Mike DeLuca, and Pam Adby. Now, Pam Adby and Mike DeLuca are another interesting facet of this thing. Now, I'm going to quote tweet what he said about Zack and Netflix later on, about Mike and Pam, right? He doesn't talk to me, James, anymore. I like James. I ain't got a problem with James. But I just think it was a tad disrespectful to call this sell Snyderverse to Netflix campaign wacky. I think it's disrespectful. And as I said, even if he has no chance, these people are telling people not to attack you, James. And this is how you pay them back, right? It's disrespect. He's going back to the arrogance he had after the release of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1. Now, he became a lot more humble when he got his job back at Disney and at Marvel, when he started being very apologetic. But now he's got this DC job. He's getting very, very, let's just say, maybe a slightly bigger head. I support him. I support what he's doing. I want him to do this. But respect between the industry and its customers is integrally important now. Because you need us. You need us. You need the white men, you need the straight white males, you need the gay people, you need the transgender people, you need the black people, you need the Native Americans. You need everyone, right? And don't segregate these people, for crying out loud. We're all your fucking customers, right? Forget your politics, forget your agenda, make the best fucking DC universe you can make and stop antagonizing your fucking customers. Have you got any brains out there? Is everyone on Hollywood on so much smack that you can't think straight when it comes to your customers? I didn't like my customers either, James, right? I was on a deli counter, 8 to 8. I've said this story before, no breaks. I used to take my frustrations out on my customers. Guess what? My deli counter fucking shut down. Hollywood is on the verge of fucking meltdown. You can't afford to antagonize your customers. So yes, it's fine that you said you've spoken to Zack. It's great that Zack is behind your plan. That's great. I expect nothing less from Zack Snyder. He's a gentleman, and I'm sure that he means it. But just because he didn't mention to you that he would love to finish his Justice League arc, which he would, we all know that, Zack could have easily at any time, during this sell Snyderverse to Netflix thing, say, guys, don't do it. Forget Valentine's Day. Don't do it. I've moved on. Now, maybe he may even do that before this campaign happens. Unlikely, but anything's possible in this game. Maybe he'll bend the knee. I doubt it. As I say, anything's possible. I hope not. But none of this is impossible, right? It's unlikely that this happens, right? But it's not, as I said earlier, it's not beyond the realms of possibility that James Gunn and Peter Safran, the co-CEOs of DC Studios, are left out of the negotiating table. It's not beyond the realms of possibility. I'm telling you. So James Gunn's saying to you that Netflix haven't shown any interest, right? They haven't even spoken about it with James Gunn and Peter Safran. So how would you know, James? Yes, you and Peter are the co-CEOs of DC Studios. And basically, your job is to create a DC universe. Now, in terms of DC Elseworlds, all we've got right now is stuff that's nothing to do with you. And, you know, obviously, it could have even been David Zaslav who said, call that DC Elseworlds so people don't get confused, right? Or maybe it's yours and Peter's idea. It doesn't matter. Right now, in active development, A Black Superman movie, nothing to do with James and Peter. They didn't green light that. The Batman 2, they didn't green light that. Warner Brothers Discovery did. The Joker 2 is nothing to do with them. And as I said a few weeks ago, have you noticed he never mentions the name Todd Phillips? I think he's done it once. But obviously, I think a progressive like Gunn doesn't even like the first Joker movie, if he's being honest, because apparently it makes excuses for incels. I bet he doesn't even fucking like the Taxi Driver movie, right? There's no bigger there's no bigger place of incels than in Hollywood. Why do you think that these poor women had to create, Time's Up and Me Too? Because most of them are bloody incels in the fucking industry, right? But they attack us apparently, we're the incels, right? Not them. Why don't you let me go there with my camera and my pad and investigate you all, and let's see who the incels are, you or us. As I say, I respect the talent of people in the entertainment industry. I mean, it's not the surge of talent we had when I was growing up, when I was like 10 years old, 20 years old, 30 years old, or even, let's say, 45 years old, right? It all ended when the peak TV Janir period finished in around 2011, when Smallville went off the air. Because 2000 to around 2011 was a peak period of American TV. In fact, British TV as well, because we had Life on Mars and stuff like that, and Stephen Moffat's Jekyll and Sherlock. So it was a golden era for British drama and American drama. But then streaming came along, and that all died a slow and painful death. And the consumer can see it. And the industry, both in the United Kingdom and in America, aka Hollywood, went to war against its own consumer. This all started from the moment Brexit started in the UK, which I'm against, by the way, and when Donald Trump became president in America, someone else I don't approve of, but I don't talk much about, because I ain't a fucking political person. I don't give a fuck about politics, because politics is part of a fucking corrupt way of running the world, and ordinary working people are just fucking slaves. Look what they did to us over COVID. How much freedom did we have? How much independence did we have? None, right? And I'm not saying I don't agree with the vaccines, or maybe even lockdowns, but it was a very controversial thing to do, and it hurt a lot of people. In fact, some of these lockdowns have probably ended up, driving people to their deaths as well. But we're not here to talk about that. But we are here to talk about James Gunn and what he said about Zack Snyder and the Sell Snyderverse campaign to Netflix, right? So basically, nothing that James Gunn has said here, proves that Netflix are not interested, that Zack Snyder wants to move away from DC and he would never come back again. As I say, maybe he'll say that to us. And if Zack Snyder publicly says that, I'll accept it. I'll say, do you know what, Zack? I'll tweet him. I might even send him a DM on Twitter. I'll say, do you know what, Zack? I respect you. You did 3 great DC movies. You've got this great opportunity to create your own, space saga now, and you're continuing your zombie saga right on Netflix. I respect you. You don't want us to keep on going on about it anymore. We'll put some gifts up. We'll celebrate what you did with DC, and we'll move on. If Zack Snyder wants to move away, if Netflix comes out publicly and says, do you know what, guys? Can you stop this campaign? We are not interested. I say, do you know what, Netflix? Although I don't like the way you're stopping the sharing the passwords and stuff, I respect you as a company. What you did, you created the streaming model. I respect you. You don't want to do something as a business, that's entirely up to you. We move on and we celebrate what Zack did with Watchmen, Man of Steel, BVS, and the Snyder Cut. I can live with that. Even though I think it's disgusting how he was treated, I can live with that and move forward and support what James Gunn is doing. What I can't support is James saying, well, he didn't show any intention of wanting to come back to DC. Our Netflix didn't show any interest in, buying the Snyderverse because it didn't come in the discussions. Well, what do you mean they didn't show anything? Let's be honest, James, you didn't discuss it. They didn't say no to it. And if this actually happens, and if negotiations actually happen, you and Peter probably won't be involved in those negotiations. Shall I tell you, the only job of Peter Safran and James Gunn to basically launch a successful brand new universe called DC Universe. And that's it. That's his job. I'm sorry, James Gunn, you don't have the power you think you do. And if you want to ask about, being left out the loop and being stabbed in the back, why don't you ask your good friend, Michael Rosenbaum, who's sitting around doing a couple of podcasts. Now, they're great. I love them and I never miss one. But Michael Rosenbaum played Lex Luthor in Smallville. He should be collecting Oscars and BAFTAs every fucking year. The man's that talented. Why is he sitting in a fucking podcast booth? Because he was obviously stabbed in the back and they did something to him. Ask your friend Michael Rosenbaum, James. Ask him. Why? A man who played Lex Luthor, go and play Descent. Play the episode Descent of Smallville and tell me that's not a man who should be picking up BAFTAs and Oscars every year. Why isn't he? Why isn't he, James? Because your industry is full of backstabbers, right? That's why. So, don't pretend that you're safe. Don't pretend that everything you're doing is going to end up like happy as cheese, because we don't know. Personally, I like what you're doing, and I want it to be successful. But please, don't tell me that Zack Snyder is not interested in finishing off his DC arc, because he hasn't told you that. And you have never had a discussion with Netflix about selling Snyderverse to them, because it's beyond your pay grade, James. You are literally just in charge of developing the DC universe. That's it. That is it. You have nothing to do with anything else. And when the big boy pants come out, it's David Zaslav, Mike DeLuca, and Pam Adby wearing them. And that's the truth here. So, in terms of any decisions being made, as I say, I don't think it's, I think it's very unlikely that Snyderverse gets sold to Netflix. But that's not the point. It was very unlikely that the Snyder Cut would get released until AT&T bought Warner Brothers, right? From Time Warner, or whoever they were. Everything's impossible, everyone. Everything's unlikely. Women getting rights, right? Was impossible. That didn't stop them from fighting for them, because too right they should have the same rights as men. And some of them lost their very lives, but they were brave. So I would say to the Snyderverse fans and stans who will be hashtagging and posting on Twitter and Instagram on Valentine's Day, a day of love, by the way, don't give up. And yes, James Gunn doesn't have the power to stop any of this, but he doesn't want it to happen. And plus, some of you have been very unfair to James, and he's trying to dig back at you, right? And this is what he's attempting to do. But I think calling the sell the Snyderverse to Netflix campaign wacky, utterly disrespectful, and those people deserve an apology, James. I really do. Because they're not doing anything bad. They're telling people not to attack you, and you call it wacky. But we know that James Gunn doesn't want this to happen. And I understand, James. I understand. It will be very, very difficult for you for this to happen. But in the final 7 minutes of this video, let's discuss what would happen, right? Is it really that messy for Zack to come back to do 3 movies and maybe Ben Affleck do the Batman thing? Let's look at it logically, right? They're going to have 2 Batmen. Potentially, they could have 2 fucking Constantines. Potentially, they're going to have 2 Supermen. In terms of the Black Superman there, and the new DC Universe Superman being launched in Superman Legacy. Now, right? Is it that messy to just finish off Zack's arc? 2 more movies that people are dying for, that can make Zaslav and Warner Brothers Discovery money? Is it that problematic? I know what people say. Move on. But what if they don't move on? Let's just say for argument's sake, I have conceded all of this is very, very unlikely, right? But let's discuss this in the final remnants of this video. Who does it hurt? If what James Gunn is doing and Peter Safran is doing is so good and so strong, Zack can't hurt you. But because he's just going to be working on his thing. As I say, he's so busy right now, I don't know when he would do it, and time's running out because these Snyderverse actors ain't getting any younger, baby. I understand. And I've said already, unlikely. But we're just talking. It doesn't really hurt anyone to do this. And I think it's rather miserly and unkind to deny Zack and the fans this thing. And as that Collider article or comingsoon.net or whoever said it, the Snyderverse is going to haunt James Gunn until this happens. Because these fans are like a dog with a bone. And they ain't never going to let go. Never. And that's the problem you have. And you know what, James? If you think this is a battle you can win, you can't. So calling it a wacky thing isn't good. It's, as I say, it's like you weren't born with any brains. I don't want to be disrespectful. Again, I like James. I think he's a smart guy. But you've got to understand. You've got to understand who's in charge here. It's your customers. Even the Snyderverse stands, the ones who are not so loud, are your customers. And you could be winning some of them over. Right? It's back to the Sarah Michelle Gellar thing. Promoting a vampire show, whatever she was doing, and accusing people of being sexist against female superheroes. Of course, this is not a true thing. But she said it. So all her customers who loved Buffy and loved her for Buffy ain't going to watch her shit. That's what she did during marketing. Do you know what marketing is, everyone? When you're trying to sell something. But now in all of their marketing, they talk about their shit, crappy identity politics. They use it as a political campaign and they trigger the people who buy the merch, the Blu-rays, the 4Ks and tune in every week to watch their shit. That ain't clever behaviour. I don't care. Maybe they've decided they don't want to be a profit-making industry anymore and they just want to become a political industry. That's entirely up to them. It's theirs, it's their money. They can do what they want. But as I say, what James Gunn said about it being a wacky idea, and I mean, what did he mean by a wacky idea? I don't know. Does that mean a good idea? Was it disrespectful? I don't know. I think it's a great idea. Maybe he meant it's a good idea. I don't know. It doesn't sound like it though, does it? I think it's a great idea for Netflix to have that and to make money. And for Zaslav and Discovery it will help them raise that $3 billion. The problem for Gunn here is that if what Snyder does ends up being a little bit more relatable and more exciting to people, because love or hate Snyder, everybody knows him, he's an infamous director now. And this is very problematic because James Gunn is, I suppose, a little bit of an attention whore. And I'm not saying that in a disrespectful way. And so he doesn't want some other director getting his attention, right? He doesn't want this to happen. And he knew exactly. Why didn't he tell us that he's spoken to Zack, right? Ages ago. Why didn't he say this Netflix thing ages ago? He's waited just before 214 happens to try and deflate some people's excitement so the trending hashtag isn't as successful because he's worried about said trending hashtag. So they're tactics, right? I want his plan to work. I want Superman Legacy to work. Let's hope he's not taking any liberties with my character. But I also want this hashtag to be successful on Valentine's Day. Because why shouldn't it? Why shouldn't I? Why shouldn't I want Zack to finish off his arc, but for this DC universe to also be successful? I'm not a one or other thing. I'm not part of some civil war. Because I'm a fucking grown-up. I can like both things. I can be hyped for both things. So ultimately here, don't let James deflate your excitement, deflate your tires. There's still a slight chance if this is successful. Now maybe 214 won't be successful, but you have the right to attempt to do it. And hopefully what James Gunn has said here has been seen through by intelligent Snyder fans. Don't attack him. Maybe that's what he wants. Maybe that's what he wants, to make you look really, really bad. Don't let that happen. Do your thing. Ignore James. Because ultimately, his and Peter Safran's position here is to create a successful DC universe, and that's it. That's why they're the co-CEOs of DC Studios. But the big decisions, they're not going to be making any decision. about Snyderverse being sold to Netflix or not. That's not their decisions. That's nothing to do with them. But the reason they're talking to Netflix is about the stuff they've conceived for streaming, that they've conceived for streaming. The Snyderverse has nothing to do with them. And any potential decision to sell Snyderverse to Netflix will have nothing to do with them. And they will not be behind and round the negotiating table. This has been Friday's edition of the DC Universe Daily with me, Mick, your host with the most. Just ask your girlfriends and your wife. Please like, share, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you never miss this beautiful perfection. And I'll see you again in the next video. Until I see you again, goodbye, au revoir, auf Wiedersehen.